Okay, good afternoon and welcome to Congressional Conversations, where we have a chance to discuss the priorities of New York Jewish community with our congressional elected officials. I am Gideon Taylor. I have the honor to serve as Executive Vice President and CEO of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, or JCRC. So today we are extremely excited to be joined by Representative Thomas Suozzi. He's a member of the powerful House and Ways Means Committee, which, as I'm sure our viewers know, is the chief tax writing committee of the House of Representatives, and he serves on both the oversight and tax policy subcommittees. He's the congressional representative of New York's 3rd District. Welcome, Congressman.
Hey, Gideon, thanks so much for having me on. Great to see you.
Terrific. And why don't we dive in? I think one of the issues, before we come to some of the issues that are of direct concern to the Jewish community, obviously the Jewish community is very concerned about New York and what's happening to New York and New York's role. And I guess the first issue we want to talk about, the Build Back Better deal, as you know, has been a big topic. And your slogan has become a known slogan: no SALT, no deal. Can you give us a little bit of background on where we're at on the SALT issue and how it affects the district and how you see this issue kind of playing out?
Well, it's become kind of no deal, no SALT, because Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema killed our deal over in the Senate. In the House, we were successful. We increased the state and local tax deduction from what it was capped at $10,000 by the Trump administration to $80,000, which would have helped 97% of the people of New York State. So just so you know, a little background is that when the federal tax code was first formed in the United States of America, governors and mayors and local elected officials said, listen, we don't want a federal tax. You're going to take away the money from us for the things we want to do locally. They said, no, don't worry. We're going to do a state and local tax deduction so you can deduct your property taxes and your state and local income taxes so you don't have to pay federal taxes on the taxes you've already paid. And that was in place for 100 years. And then in 2017, as a way to generate a lot of money for the federal government so they could use it for the other things they wanted to do, President Trump and the GOP-controlled House and Senate said we're going to cap that deduction at $10,000. Well, that hurt New York very badly, and it hurt other high-tax states like New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Illinois, California, Massachusetts, Maryland. You notice little commonality there. They're all Democratic states, and President Trump said, you know, you're not going to vote for me anyway as a state. So we need the money to pay for the other cuts we want to do elsewhere. So this has been a real body blow for New Yorkers. So I've said, listen, I support you, Mr. President. I want to do your big, bold initiatives. It's great. But if we do any changes to the tax code, you have to include a fix of the state and local tax deduction. No SALT, no deal. So I teamed up. It was me, Josh Gottheimer, Mikey Sherrill from New Jersey, and some other folks that are very concerned about this issue that said, we're not voting for the deal. We want to vote for the deal, but we're not voting for the deal unless you give this to us. So it was some hard knuckle politics because the Republicans were against us as a group. You know, we had about 10 Republicans that supported the idea, but they wouldn't do the overall deal. And we had a bunch of the progressives that were against us on this as well. So we really had to hold firm, but we were successful. We got it through the House from 10,000 to 80,000. It went to the Senate. Schumer was 100% with us, as were many other senators. And we got Manchin and Sinema to say, listen, they're not going to mess with the SALT portion, the state and local tax deduction. So we thought we had the win. And then they blew up the deal overall. So, it's still alive out there. It's still a big priority for me and a lot of my colleagues because it's so important to us locally. I mean, New York has the highest taxes, state and local taxes in America. And we all know that people are leaving New York. 300,000 people left New York alone, the biggest net out migration of any state in the United States of America. And there are a lot of reasons for that. You know, people are concerned about crime, for example, in New York City. There's other quality of life issues, but taxes is the big scary thing, taxes and utility rates, the affordability. So we have to address this issue. And if we can't address the issue at the federal level, we're going to have to figure out how can we reduce taxes in New York State without hurting all the important programs that we believe in so strongly.
So are you confident? You think it'll come back around when the next opportunity comes? You think you'll be able to get that coalition back together to support that?
There's no question that the coalition will hold together. The question is whether we can get any kind of deal done overall. I'm confident that if there's a deal, we'll get SALT done because we're going to hold fast. But the problem is whether we can get an overall deal done.
Mhm.
And now we're also distracted with so many other issues that are going on. Ukraine, for example, is such a big issue right now that I don't know when we're going to get back to the deal.
So let's turn to that, to Ukraine. Obviously, it's on our minds, such concern for what's happening in Ukraine. Generally, there's a big Jewish community, as you know, in Ukraine. I used to work for an agency, for two agencies that had a lot of programs. I spent a lot of time in Ukraine with the Jewish community and working on programs generally in Ukraine. What's your, maybe you can give us a sense of, you got some support there in the background.
The dog is barking during our recording.
Yeah, okay. He's got opinions too. Everyone's got an opinion. But how do you see our engagement on Ukraine? What do you see the long-term future for relations with Russia, Ukraine, and how that ties in with the United States?
Well, listen, we have to, just say very clearly that Putin's a liar. He's a manipulator, and he's using violence. He's killing people to try and have his way. And we have to be very united. We have to make sure that the Democrats and Republicans hold together on this. We have to go back to the old philosophy, which should be the current philosophy, which is that partisanship stops at the water's edge. We have to stick together in our country. And that's the same philosophy we have to have with our allies. We have to do this with the United States, with our NATO allies, and every freedom-loving, democratic-loving country in the world to be united on this issue and to hold Russia accountable. So what do we have to do? We have to continue to support the Ukrainian people that are battling so well, holding back the tide, which means we have to give them money, more money for military aid, for humanitarian aid, and support them every way we can. We have to have continued sanctions, not just going after Putin himself and his cronies and the oligarchs, but going after properties here in the United States of America. I think we should be considering very seriously padlocking the front door of known oligarchs' properties here in New York and throughout the country. We have to boycott Russian products. I'm very excited that the European Union and others have agreed to cutting off the banking system through SWIFT. That's such an important development. I'm excited that the NATO countries, including Germany, have agreed to increase their defense budget to 2% of their overall budget. That's a very important factor that they're taking on this responsibility, and we're not going it alone as America by itself. I'm very excited that they've cut off the Nord Stream pipeline. That's a very important thing as well. We have to really, nobody wants to go to war, but we have these passionate feelings for the Ukrainian people. And if we can hold our coalition together and crush Russia economically, that Putin realizes what a tragic, fatal mistake he has made here, that this is a new world. There was a great article written in the New York Times by Tom Friedman where he talked about how, this is being carried live on the web. And they're tracking, traffic jams caused by Russian tanks. So people are outraged, including Russians themselves. So, freedom and democracy, that's what we're fighting for. And what is freedom and democracy? It's politics. Everybody hates politics these days, but that's what we're fighting for. We're fighting for freedom and democracy, and that's politics. We need the people to be as involved as possible in politics, because that's what we've fought all these wars about. That's what we're fighting for in the Ukraine. That's why we're doing these sanctions. I think that Russia is going to have to wake up to the reality that this is a new world, and they cannot do this. They have to worry about, China, quite frankly, is going to be worried about the effect on them economically. So this is, I went to I'm sorry to keep on talking so much, but I'm so excited about this topic because it's so important. I went to a Ukrainian Orthodox Catholic Mass on Sunday morning. And one of the first readings that they had was Blessed Are the Peacemakers. And, I spoke at the end of the Mass and I said, we want Blessed Are the Peacemakers is such an important idea to so many of us. But we have these other feelings of like anger that, we want to kill somebody because, how can you do this? Well, let's just wipe them off the face of the earth. And then we have these other feelings of sadness. These poor people are suffering so much. And then we have these other feelings of helplessness. Can't we do more to stop this madman from imposing his will when nobody thinks that's the way to conduct yourself in the modern world? Some people obviously think that way still, a lot of our strategic adversaries. So
Right.
we just got to hold together, and hopefully we can unify and stay unified on this Democrat, Republican, US and Europe, US, Europe, and the Western world and democracy. We all have to hold together against this aggression.
And look, it's certainly something, so as you know, of such concern to so many New Yorkers. And I know from the Jewish community, there's many Jews who come from Ukraine, who actually come from Ukraine, or who are descended from Ukrainian Jews.
Let me tell
you.
After I went to the Ukrainian Orthodox Catholic Mass, we had a rally in my hometown of Glen Cove. We had 400, 500 people there. There's a Holocaust survivor there, from Ukraine. We did a rally in front of the United Nations mission, the Russian ambassador to the United Nations mission. Now, that mission has been there since the founding of the United Nations. It used to be the Soviet ambassador to the United Nations. My father was the mayor of Glen Cove, our hometown, in the 1950s when Khrushchev came and banged his shoe on the podium. And then he came out and did a press conference in Glen Cove. And the family story is that my dad was the mayor. He said, "You're holding up traffic." He broke up the press conference. But then I was the mayor of Glen Cove in the 90s. And it's when Glasnost took place. And Sergei Lavrov, who we see on television all the time now, who's the foreign minister, was the Russian ambassador to the United Nations.
Right.
So I was invited to a party at the facility, which had been cloaked in secrecy for decades. And it was all the ambassadors from all over the world. Madeleine Albright was there, celebrating the 50th anniversary of this location of this facility. And it was this era of good feeling when everybody was going to work together and things were going to be open. I'll never forget when Sergei Lavrov introduced me that day, because he was trained as a British diplomat. He introduced me as the Lord Mayor. I said, "Oh, I hope that sticks." You know that from Ireland. That's the Lord. I said, "I hope that sticks." And then we had other parties there as well. So there's this era of good feeling. And Putin, because we all know, he's got this mentality. He thinks that, the breakup of the Soviet Union was the worst thing to ever happen. And he's got to bring back the glory of Russia again to the Soviet days and all the landmass that they had. And he's just in a different mindset of everybody. And it's a scary thing that he's got the power that he does have. That's why it's so important that we all hold together. This is not just about Russia versus the Ukraine. This is about freedom versus authoritarianism. This is really one of the battles of our time.
Right. And yeah, I think it's certainly so much on our minds. And
there are a lot of Jews in the Ukraine too, as well, that are
right.
terrified.
And I spent a lot of time with many of them, not only in Kiev, but across the whole country, including Holocaust survivors. My previous career was helping Holocaust survivors, and there were many Holocaust survivors in Kiev that we provided assistance to, and I'm still involved and will continue to provide assistance to. So it's just of concern in so many different ways for us in New York, obviously, as well as globally. So thank you.
The rally that we had in Glen Cove in front of the Russian ambassador to the United Nations mission, literally blocks away from where I live, was helped to be organized by the Holocaust Memorial and Educational Center here in Glen Cove. That when I was the mayor, we helped to bring that here.
So let's turn now to issues around sort of anti-Semitism and security. Obviously, this has been always an issue for the Jewish community. The events in Colleyville obviously threw it into very, very sharp relief for us. The JCRC, as you know, one of our roles, we have many different roles of representing the Jewish community and being advocates on issues relating concern to New Yorkers. One of those issues is security. And we have a program that we do together with the UJ Federation, that we run a program. We have a team of people who go around to institutions, synagogues, schools, advising them on how to harden the facilities, on active shooter training, doing trainings. That's a big, a function, a role that existed in a very small way for us years ago, and now is a very significant part of our work, unfortunately. A big part of providing that security has been the role of federal funds to help places of worship and institutions. And by the way, I should say, we work, as I think you know, not only with the Jewish community, we also provide services and work closely with other communities of faith, with the Catholic Church, with the diocese, and with others, to give that expertise that unfortunately we've developed and a finely honed set of skills that over the years we've had to develop develop. And that's an important, with that interfaith coalition on houses of worship, very important for us. So this issue of federal funding is particularly important for us. And I just wanted to sort of get your take on that, and our hope that we would see an increase in the funding for the non-profit security grants, because they're just so important for us, and for not only just for our community, but I think for all communities of faith and communities, nonprofits. You
will definitely see an increase, and we're going to get this finally done. That we'll get a budget deal done this month. So I'm very excited about that. Finally, that it's going to happen. I know the important work that JCRC does for many, many years, as well as UJA and so many others on security. I've always been a huge supporter of additional funding for security, as well as for, education, the Never Again Education Act. And any bill that the JCRC or UJA or any of my friends from the Jewish community support, I'm there 100%. You can't name a single piece of legislation that I'm not a part of to try and support the Jewish community. And anti-Semitism is very real. It is growing. I feel so strongly about education. There's prevention in long term, and there's short term intervention. Intervention, we got to get the funds for security training. We have to support the law enforcement. We have to do everything we can to be vigilant at all times for intervention. Prevention for the long term, education is a big part of it, to understand what the heck is going on here. I was very fortunate that I went to Chaminade Catholic, all boys Catholic high school. And one of the books required reading for us was Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which was really an eye opener for a young teenage boy from Long Island about the Holocaust. And I went for the 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge. I don't know if it was last year, 2 years ago, I guess. Maybe it was 2019 before COVID. I can't remember now. But I read the book Band of Brothers in preparation for that. And I'll never forget the scene where they're about to liberate the concentration camps. They're literally miles away and a day away from liberating some concentration camps. And the US soldiers are debating amongst each other. Have you heard this thing about the Jews? Do you think that's real? Nah, that can't be. Now here they are right on the ground, miles away, hours before liberating the concentration camps, in real time that it's going on. And they're debating, is this true? Can this be true? Now here we are, 75, whatever the number of years is since then. And there's these people that, with misinformation, that are just trying to manipulate people about the Holocaust. So education is so important. Can I just say one thing, Gideon? We have this problem. We have four things that are contributing to the overall hateful feelings in our country, and this is part of it. First, you have the politicians. Okay, in Congress, there's 435 seats. Of the 435 seats, 380 are safe seats you can't lose because they're gerrymandered. The Republican seat, Democrat, and the Democratic seat. The only way you lose a primary. You can't lose a general election. So the only way you can lose a primary. Well, very few people vote in the primaries. The far right votes in the Republican primary, far left votes in the Democratic primary. So all the politicians pander to the base because they're afraid they'll lose the primary, and nobody votes in the primary except for the extremists, or most of the people who vote are the extremists. So they don't do the stuff in the middle because they're afraid they'll lose the primary. That's where it starts. Then you go to social media. Who are the most popular people on social media? People say the most extreme things. You get the most likes, the most followers, the most eyeballs. So extremism promoted on social media. Then you have cable news. Well, it's not like it was, I was growing up with, broadcast news 2, 4, and 7. It's these little channels that are designed to stimulate people and get them excited so they can sell advertising. Tucker Carlson's the most watched show on Fox News, and Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, 4 million, 3 million viewers. That's it. But they are not trying to educate. They're trying to titillate. They're trying to get people excited so they can sell advertising. It's 330 million people in America. Only 4 million people watch Tucker Carlson. 3 million watch Rachel Maddow. So they're at the fringes. So politicians pandering, social media pandering, cable news pandering, and then the thing we have to be most worried about of anything else, the biggest worry of all. I wrote a letter about this with Peter King and other members of the Long Island delegation to the FBI and the CIA and national security. Our foreign adversaries, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, they are using our freedom and our social media and our platforms to sow civil unrest in our country. They take a kernel of truth with a debate that's going on in our country, Black Lives Matter versus Blue Lives Matter, or, some religious thing, whatever. And they conflagrate it. They make it bigger to get everybody all excited because they want to sow civil unrest and they want to make it so that democracy can't work, so that they look like the shining stars with authoritarianism. We have to guard against our foreign adversaries that are trying to pull us apart. That's why when we talked about Ukraine before, it's so important that we hold together on this, because they figured out a while ago that it's cheaper to sow civil unrest and use misinformation and disinformation than it is to buy a tank or a missile. So we have to, and I think that that's contributing to anti-Semitism. There is anti-Semitism. There's no question it exists, but it's being fomented by all these different factors. Same thing with anti-Asian hate and anti-Muslim hate. It's all, people are trying to manipulate us, and we have to be conscious of it.
Yeah, I think it's one of the priorities as I've come into JCRC, that one of the priorities that I've inherited, that we've done, and that I think we need to expand, is our role as bridge builder. So JCRC has traditionally had, for example, these fellowships. I don't know if you've had a chance to join, and maybe the next time we have a gathering somewhere nearby, you'll take a few minutes to join. Bringing kind of young, rising leaders, people from the nonprofit sector, from some from government, some from the justice system, from community activists, just to meet in groups for a year, discussing civic engagement. And it was fascinating. The first one I went to, it was people who had, for most of them, it was their first time out of their bubble, out of their world or wherever they came from. And there was a Jewish one here and a Catholic one there and a Muslim there. And and not just religiously, but just geographically within the New York, within in the type of field they're in the type of things. So I think
do such great work. I'm telling you, your predecessor, Michael Miller, took me to Israel back in 2002 during the Second Intifada, right after the massacre in Hebron, and really is what persuaded me to become such. I was always, pro-Israel, but I really didn't know what I was talking about. And 2002, when I went there, it was a life-changing experience for me, literally a life-changing experience. And I have been so staunchly pro-Israel since that time. I've told this story many times before. If you want me to tell it, I'll tell it again sometime. But I was so impacted by that trip. Because it was such a governmental, political trip. I learned so much, but then all of a sudden, I met with, Shimon Peres at the time. I was the U.S. ambassador. I traveled to so many, I went to Yad Vashem. I went to the universities. I went to all the Hadassah Hospital with all the skin banks, because all the bombings were going on at the time. So many different, and it was a very educational trip, political, governmental. And then I went to the Western Wall where Jesus walked, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe that I hadn't even thought of it from that perspective. And then I went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and I have to go to Mass. I have to go to service while I'm here. I can't tell my mother I was in Jerusalem and I didn't go to Mass at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So we went back to the King David Hotel. The place was vacant because it was the Intifada. There were no tourists there whatsoever. And I said, listen, I have to go to Mass at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I have to. So we're sorry, you can't go. We don't have the security. Everywhere we went, we were in buses with the chicken wire on them, and people with machine guns protecting us. I said, but I have to go to Mass. He said, we can't. We don't have it on the schedule. We can't make it happen. But we're sorry, it's just not safe. So the next morning, I snuck out of the hotel, and I went to Mass at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And I was like, oh, I'm such a good Catholic boy. Look at me. I'm so proud of myself. My mother's going to be so proud of me. And then I went to Mass, and I took such a risk to my safety. And I did this. Look at how courageous I am. And then I walked outside, and I saw the little girls getting on the school bus to go to school that morning. I was like, oh my gosh. I said, these are the people that are courageous, people have been trying to kill them for the past, at the time, I guess it was 60 years. And they have managed to make the desert bloom and to keep democracy and to have the rule of law and to participate in the modern world, and all the stuff with technology that was just starting then is now, changed the world. So I decided right then when I saw those little schoolgirls that I would always be a strong advocate of Israel.
Wow. So tell us, how do you see the situation now? Are you optimistic for the future? Or how do you see the safety, security issues, the so much turmoil, change, the Abraham Accords? What's your sort of general sort of perspective now on Israel and Middle East? And
well, I'm naturally an optimist about things, but I try to be a clear-eyed optimist. I mean, there's always going to be, even when you think you've got it all figured out, you've got to be constantly vigilant. We thought we'd work things out with Russia, glasnost, and Cold War was over, and now we got Putin back. You just never know who's going to try and tear us back down. Tom Lantos was a congressman years ago, and decades ago, 2 decades ago, and he was a Holocaust survivor. We have the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. He had a great quote that I use often now: "The veneer of civilization is paper thin. We are its guardians, and we cannot rest." That is what's going on right now with Ukraine. That's what's happening all the time with Israel and its enemies in the region. That's what's going on with the Uyghurs in China. That's what's going on with all the hateful things that we see happening in the world all the time that we have to guard against. We are its guardians, and we cannot rest because the veneer of civilization is paper thin. So I'm optimistic. I supported the Abraham Accords. I didn't support President Trump on a lot of different things, but everything he did on Israel, I supported him. And, I got beaten up for it by certain people, but, that's part of leadership, is that, I supported the movement of the embassy to Jerusalem. I supported the Abraham Accords. I supported any money for Iron Dome and everything. I'll always support Israel on everything. I don't care who does it. And anybody who speaks out against Israel or anti-Semitic, whether they're Republicans, which is easy to do because, it's partisan, Marjorie Taylor Greene, whatever. But even the Democrats, I stand up against them too. Ilhan Omar with her, it's all about the Benjamins and other things that we've heard that are destructive comments. We need people to stand up and be strong, not based upon partisanship, not based upon what's politically correct, but about doing the correct thing for people and about what's right and what's wrong. And we have to move away from this partisan, hostile feeling we have. So, listen, I'm always optimistic that we're gonna figure this out. We know that Israel has a very strong interest in remaining a democratic Jewish state, and they want to have a solution. Unfortunately, we just don't have a partner on the other side to make a solution. So in the meanwhile, it's kind of like the crime issue, prevention and intervention. It's like, you have the immediate things you got to do right now to stay safe and get through the day and get through the month and get through the year. And then we have to be constantly working on the long-term stuff to educate people, to build relationships. That's why the Abraham Accords are so important, and other efforts that are done for Israel to build economic relationships with other countries, because I believe that that's a big part of the solution here. The more that we can build economic relationships with other countries, the more we get interdependent, we get to know each other better, the more it'll help us. I quite frankly think the Palestinians, we should be figuring out, I always had an idea, I've never been able to figure out how to make it happen. We should set up a huge insurance fund with all the Western world, with billions of dollars in it. And anybody who wants to invest in Palestinian areas, we'll give you an insurance fund. So if it gets taken over, nationalized by the Palestinians, or it gets blown up or something like that, you'll be protected financially. But if we can figure out how to economically invest and lift people's lives up, so that we went along with Golda Meir and said, they care more about their children than they do about hate. They love their children more than they hate us. If we lift people's lives up, they don't want to give it up. Right now, some people feel like I've got nothing to lose. So, but that's for another day. So,
well, and you have been such a strong supporter of Israel and Israel issues. We are so, I felt for all, I think New Yorkers, not just Jewish New Yorkers, I think we're all New Yorkers. That's such a we're so encouraged and appreciative of your engagement. You've had it, obviously, it's not just political, it's obviously a very personal feeling for you. So we appreciate that.
I will always be my goal is to be known as the most reliable non-Jewish Democrat in Congress on the issue of Israel. So that's
Jewish? You're not Jewish?
My dad was really, my father was born in Italy and came to the United States as a young boy and lived a great American success story. And he was really discriminated against. He was 18 in 1939, and his yearbook, he wrote, they said, "What's your goal in life?" And other kids would say, "I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be an engineer, I want to travel the world." He said, "My goal is to be a real American." I used to think, who thinks of that when they're 18 years old? But when my dad died, I realized that he was 18 when Mussolini had teamed up with Hitler. So Americans thought of the Italians as either being fascist or in the mafia or whatever. And he was subject to terrible discrimination. He went to first kid in the neighborhood to go to college. He fought in World War II as a navigator on a B-24. He came back home and went to Harvard Law School on the GI Bill. And he couldn't get a job at a law firm because he was Italian. Nobody would hire the Italians. So he got involved locally in Glen Cove, our hometown. He ended up running for city court judge and became the youngest judge in the history of New York State at 28 years old. What a country. But
Wow.
he was always so passionate. If somebody ever said anything, though even it was a joke that was demeaning of another person based upon their being Jewish or being African American or being, anything, he would either walk out or he would say something, but he was not stood for in our house. And when I went through my father's papers when he passed away, I have a Israeli war bond from 1973 signed by Golda Meir.
Wow.
And so, my dad gave the eulogies at so many people's so many Jewish funerals of his closest friends. And, so it was always a big part of our lives. And I'm just I've always thought about what am I going to do? My father immigrated, my grandparents immigrated on the Italian side, English grandmother immigrated from England. They all lived through the Depression. My grandparents, my parents, my father, World War II. Got a picture of my father with John F. Kennedy campaigning in 1960, and then the civil rights. My parents were involved. It's like, what am I going to do? What's going to be my big thing that I'm going to contribute? And I feel like this time right now in history is so important for all of us that we all need to be involved and think of this as that time in history where we're either going to stand up or we're going to stand by. And I'm hopefully will live up to my parents and my grandparents' reputations and stand up and try and do the right thing on Israel, on anti-Semitism, on Ukraine, on the Uyghurs in China, on my state, my local community. I just want to try and be known as a person who stood up.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. So I guess last question, I hope it's an invitation. As you know, one of JCRC's many other roles is to bring the community together, both Jewish and non-Jewish community, in support of Israel. For the last 2 years, we have not been on the streets marching in our Celebrate Israel parade, which takes place up Fifth Avenue. You know the parade well. May 22nd, we will be back on the streets after an absence of 3 years. And I hope we'll get a chance to march up together up Fifth Avenue.
I'll be there, Gideon.
Excellent. And we're inviting other groups, both within the Jewish community, other groups to join us, because I think we've lost a lot of that voice on the streets. And it's so important that I think the community comes together, Jews, non-Jews, elected officials, just this wider community, to put aside the politics, put aside all the rancor, and just say Israel is a remarkable place and it's so important for the Jewish community and for the world. And that's what we do up Fifth Avenue. So I look forward to
let's all stand up together
with you. Excellent. Terrific.
Thank you, my friend. Toda rabah.
Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for all the engagement you've had with JCRC. I look forward to continuing it. We'll talk again, and if not on Fifth Avenue, May 22nd, if not before. Thanks so much.
Whenever it's beshert, whenever it's meant to happen, I'll be sure to see you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.